Good morning. Thank you so much for turning out today. That's my election joke. No, I hope everybody does get a chance to vote. Thank you for braving the rain and the traffic and the carpool line, and we're so glad to have you here today. I'm Sarah Gleason-Ross. I'm the Director of College Counseling. As many of you know, this is my second year at Gilman, and I just continue to be just so thrilled to be a part of this school, part of this community, to work with these incredible young men, this amazing faculty, and this fabulous team of colleagues. This morning, we're expecting our guest in a few minutes, so we thought we'd get started with some kind of what we do in our office and kind of give you an overview, and then we'll introduce our guest when he gets here in a few minutes. We think he's stuck in a little bit of traffic. So before I start, I want to introduce my colleagues. We are very privileged here at Gilman to have an amazing team. And I did a little math. We have over 100 years of experience under our belt. So we have here Matt Herman, Justin Baker, Anna Follingsby, and Vivian Sawyer is our people administrator in the back. So I'm really grateful to work with such a great team, and they're going to introduce themselves in a little bit and give a little bit more overview of their experience and what they do here at Gilman. I wanted to talk a little bit about our mission as college counseling. Our mission in the college counseling office is very much in line with the Gilman mission. Our mission is to know our students and to love our students and to help them become the best versions of themselves. Really, what we do in the college counseling office is very much an extension of what goes on at Gilman School. From the moment a student steps foot on this campus, he's preparing for college. And we are an extension. We're very fortunate to have a very wonderful team. So we have about a 30-to-1 student or counselor-student ratio. So we're very privileged in that regard. Our job is to, as we get to know these students, our principal mission is to help each student find the best college fit. And we do that by getting to know them. We also do that by getting to know the whole landscape of colleges. There are over 4,000 colleges in the United States alone. So how do you narrow that down? You narrow it down by getting to know each student, getting to know him very well, and then we advocate for that student. And that is another very important piece of what we do, is we write a letter of recommendation that is our strongest piece of advocacy for each student. It's something that we love doing, that it's kind of the pinnacle of what we do here. We've just finished our season with the seniors, so about close to 100% have applied early, and we finished writing a letter of recommendation for everyone. And this is our point where we can really celebrate each boy's strengths and accomplishments and all that they bring to this community. So we love doing that. So outside of what we do here at Gilman is we are really out there networking and getting to know all these colleges, the admissions offices, so we can best advocate for our students. We spend a lot of time traveling, visiting other colleges. We have about 180 colleges come through here this year. We meet with those college reps. We attend conferences. We do a lot of networking events. We're part of a lot of professional associations. So it's very exciting work, and we're really privileged to be here and to do that. What we want to do now, before we go to our guest speaker, is to I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues so they can kind of give you an overview of what we do in our office, and then we'll invite our speaker forward so we can give us his perspective. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it to Justin Baker.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is my 11th year at Gilman. I teach senior English. I teach a class on American literature of the 60s with a heavy emphasis on Bob Dylan this year. And then I teach a philosophy class in the spring also to seniors. I coach middle school baseball. I'm also the junior form chair, which means that I'm kind of the academic dean for the junior class. So I look at all the junior comments and grades and work with the student support team to make sure that we're giving boys assistance and help and support when they need it, in addition to some other things that I do. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the timeline of the college counseling process. So you're at the first thing for the sophomore year now. So we hold 2 sophomore parent coffees. We have this one. And then we have another one in the spring that focuses on standardized testing. So we'll have 2 of these. I hope that you've been getting the newsletters, and Ms. Follins will talk about that in a second. That's the other piece that begins this year as well. We also have, in association with the AIMS group, which is the Association of Independent Maryland Schools, we have a financial aid night that falls in September of every year. So I would encourage anyone considering applying for financial aid next year to attend that. That's usually at Maryvale in September. And again, that will be communicated in our newsletters. Beginning junior year, the boys register for Naviance, which is the application platform that we use here. It lets them create a list of colleges that they're considering and look at different data that Gilman collects. And in most cases, the boys share that information with you, and it's a really good thing that you sit down with your sons and review their college list and look at different data and research the schools and see if it might be a good fit for your son. So that begins in junior year. We have, for the first time this year, 2 programs that officially kick off the formal part of the college counseling process. One is going to be in the evening for parents. We invite 3 college representatives to come and talk about the process of applying. And we have one during the school day for the boys. We felt that they had a lot of evening programs, so we moved their program during the school day. But you'll have your own in the evening next year, and that's in January. And also in January, the boys can either request a college counselor to work with, any of the 4 of us, or they can be assigned one. And that's when we start meeting and building lists and formally begin the application process. So that's the timeline. By the time your son's a senior now, he'll be celebrating the fact that he's submitted at least 1, but more likely like 5 or 4 or 3 applications. And I'll turn it over to Matt, who's going to talk about standardized testing.
Wonderful. So back in October, your sophomore son took the PSAT. Next October, he'll take, as a junior, the PSAT again. That is not part of the application record. That is really just a practice or preliminary SAT. And so that is good practice. That is not part of the application. It will qualify your son junior year for the National Merit semifinalist competition. Our advice is for the juniors to take the SAT and the ACT for the first time in the winter of their junior year. About 1/3 of the guys that we work with will do better on one than the other. The way you figure that out is by taking each of those tests. And then here we have formal test prep through Capital Educators that they will come here and hold for juniors Saturdays, Sundays, and Thursday classes. That's a group setting. And then there are also a handful of other well-reputable test prep. Omni, C2 Education, Monument City offer fee-based, individualized test prep. Phil Pine, who is the founder of Capital Educators, will come and kind of be the keynote speaker for that spring program that Justin was talking about. And we'll go over really the differences between the 2 tests. And so that'll happen later in the spring. Khan Academy and ACT Academy offer free online test prep. And so those are things that the boys can be doing now. If they've completed all of their other homework and are done. So the focus should be their classes and doing really well in school and getting involved in school. And we'll certainly talk about that with the boys and talk about that today. And then for extended time. So if you qualify for extended time here at Gilman, that does not necessarily mean you qualify for extended time for the ACT or the SAT. Those are separate kind of application processes that Dr. Dennis, our learning specialist, will help you and your family with that. And then one other different type, or 2 other types of tests, AP tests and subject tests. Your son is in Euro Civ this year, and if he's enjoying the class, doing really well, that is something that he could take. You could think about taking the AP test, which is going to be offered in the spring. And that is a conversation that your son should have with his AP Euro teacher to see if that would be a good thing for your son to do. And then subject tests. If your son is in Honors Latin this year, they require that your son take the SAT subject test. And I know that the classics department is in communication with you all and your son about the expectations for that. And then if your son is in honors chemistry, that is another optional test that he could take. Again, have your son speak with his chemistry teacher about that. And if testing isn't your son's thing, there's a growing number of schools that are part of test optional schools. And so fairtest.org keeps that growing list of schools that do not require standardized tests as part of the formal application process. And so that is available for you as well. And then now Ms. Follinsby is going to talk about communication.
So I'm Anna Follinsby. I'm one of the college counselors here. This is the start of my 6th year at Gilman. My background is in college admissions, so I spent 9 years working in college admissions and then came over to Gilman in the fall of 2013. In addition to college counseling, I teach a section of sophomore English, so I have some of your boys in class working their way through Oedipus Rex right now. I am also an advisor. Matt, Justin, and I are all advisors, so I have a group of 9th through 12th graders. In my advisory group, I'm a coach in the spring. I'm the assistant intramural ultimate frisbee coach. So if both Jim Morrison and Dallas Jacobs are both sick, then I'm in charge for that day. So I want to talk a little bit about communication. Did all of you receive the newsletter that came from our office in probably late September? No. Just sophomore parents. Okay. So we use the school database to send those, so whatever email that you typically get communication from Gilman is the email that should come to. If you did not get that, feel free to either send me an email later on today or stop by and I can write down a note and resend that to you and just double check that we have the right email address for you. Those newsletters will start coming with more frequency as your boys move through sophomore year and then certainly into junior and senior year, and this will be the main form of communication from the college counseling office, covering both kind of logistical things like signing up for AP tests, signing up for subject tests, and then some more philosophical things like if you're visiting a campus, what are some questions that you might ask? What's a good way to start the process? The college counseling website is also a really great source of information, so if you go on the Gilman homepage, under academics, college counseling has a whole wealth of information about visiting campuses, about the college reps who come to visit Gilman. So we'll start to invite your boys to those meetings next fall when you're juniors. So that's a good source of information also. You are probably, or your son is probably also starting to see more mail and email from colleges now that they've taken the PSAT, and that will just continue to ramp up again through junior and senior year, so you can expect your mailboxes to be flooded with shiny brochures and lots and lots and lots of emails. And I would encourage you to just kind of look at what comes through the mail, you know, even a school that you've never heard of, you're not familiar with, it's in a place that seems far away, just take a look and kind of get a sense and use that communication from colleges to see what might be out there, right, even if those aren't schools that your sons end up looking at. We also have a Facebook page. I know the boys are not really on Facebook anymore, but many parents are, so it's the College Counseling Office, Gilman School. I maintain that site, and so I post a lot of articles, updates. There's a lot of great information out there from sources like the New York Times and the Atlantic. So that's a good resource. I encourage you to like our page. And then lastly, as Justin said, we will start the process formally in junior year, January, so after the winter break. But know that we're very, very happy to answer questions and to be a resource before that. So we never want to make it seem like we won't talk to families until January of junior year. We're very much here. That's just when the individual work starts and the one-on-one meetings with counselors. But certainly if you have questions, if there's things you'd like to talk about, if there's things your son would like to talk about, we're happy to help with those prior to that time. Okay? So I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Ross.
Can I interrupt real quick? I got so excited to talk about SAT and the ACTs, I forgot to share a little bit about me. This is year number 9 at Gilman, 12 in college counseling. I teach the 11th grade U.S. history course, which is the required coordinated course. I am also the assistant JV golf coach at the school and have an advisory of 10 or so students.
Thank you. So you can see we are very blessed with a wonderful, wonderful team who who have strong control over this very stressful process for some people. So we're really glad you're here today. We're also very happy today to welcome Jonathan Webster from Washington and Lee University. We always find it's very helpful to hear from what we call the other side of the desk, somebody who's in the trenches doing this work. And we're very pleased to have Jonathan with us this morning because he has a long experience. He's a graduate of Sewanee and with a degree in English and has an MED from Vanderbilt's Peabody School. He worked for a long time at Sewanee in admissions and is currently now at Washington and Lee. He's involved professionally as a frequent presenter at meetings and conferences. Served on the admission practices committee, which is the ethics board for the Potomac Chesapeake Association of College Admission Counseling. He also serves on the executive board for the Council of Independent Colleges of Virginia and has experience managing financial aid and scholarship resources, international admission and recruitment, admission technology solutions, and website and publication development. But probably most importantly is he's a parent of a sophomore and a current high school senior. So we're really pleased to have you with us this morning, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. You voted early. And we're going to open the floor to Jonathan, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers, and all of us will be available to answer any questions you have. So as you're listening, be thinking of questions you might have. So thank you very much.
Thank
and,
you. Yeah,
All right.
this will wet. I've had a little coffee already. Yeah, all those nice things she was saying about me, I was going to observe that the most important validating fact about me is that I relate to y'all very strongly. So my sophomore was actually a college sophomore. I have a senior in high school. Neither of those facts makes me an expert at this whole thing, and that's one of the things that I'd like to kind of address with y'all. Quick show of hands, how many of you have had an older student go through the college process, right? Very good. So I used to make jokes about, oh, we ought to have a support group, you know, we're going to meet in the back corner over there and swap stories. Because I do think there's a lot of value in sharing experiences, but one of the things that I really taken to emphasizing with parent groups in particular is that every student's college process is different from every other student's college process, which undermines what I just said, right? That there's value in sharing experiences, because as soon as you volunteer an experience you've had, everybody else in that circle is thinking, wait, that didn't happen for us, or that's not what we're doing, and so it can have the adverse effect of ramping up everybody's stress around this process. Privacy is also important, and I have really valued the way in which the school community of college counseling across the nation really has begun to emphasize that aspect as well, that your kid's college selection process is your son's college selection process. He may choose to share with friends and with coaches and teachers how he's feeling about things. He may share some of that with you, but what I would encourage is that you not feel you should be sharing his experiences with others. Preserve that sense of privacy, and in that, I think your son will derive a lot of comfort and will come to view you as an important kind of backstop in all of this. So I do give a lot of talks. College admission folks, let me just make this disclaimer. You are guided by experts in this process. And so I always feel a little unnecessary when I come into a wonderful school like Gilman, in that so often I'm echoing the messages you're already hearing. Somehow that helps to validate them when you're hearing them from the folks you have right here in your school. So let me just say that I commend to you the great team at Gilman, and you begin this process with an advantage in a way, and that is these experts right here. What I was going to say is I do a lot of talks about selective college admission, I'm not doing that today. I realized as I was getting ready for this talk that this is the first time I've given a reflection on this whole process now that I have a second kid going through the process. So what I did this time was just sort of scribble some of my takeaways as a dad who happens to work with college admission. And I thought I would just share some of those, and we'll see where that takes us. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions along the way. We're going to do Q&A afterwards. I just thought that I would meander through my own thoughts about this process. And the first one I was going to offer is something I've already said, and that is every kid's process is different. So you second or third timers through this process, maybe it's already crystallized for you that kid number 2 or 3 is a different kid from kid number 1. And so that isn't to say there may not be some similarities in the way your son experiences this process and that you experience it. But let me just say that as a guy with an older daughter and a younger son, I'm sort of seeing the Mars-Venus effect in our kid time. And not that it's always gender-based differences that pop up, but there's an emerging, I say emerging, y'all will be well aware of it for a decade or more, an emerging sort of school of thought that has to do with gender differences with respect to developmental stages and top-level organizational skills and critical thinking skills and all of those things. And colleges are beginning to think about that as we make admission decisions, for sure. Educators at the secondary level have been dealing with those realities for a really long time. And parents have too, but maybe they didn't have that vocabulary before. My son is a mess. At least I can say that. I don't know if this applies to you all. But recognizing each student is going to have a different process. And so it's not like the instructions on the old shampoo bottle, rinse and repeat. You don't just do the same thing you did the first time, because every kid is different. And we've certainly seen that to be true. One of my real trusted friends in college counseling, I'm from Tennessee, she works at a Tennessee school, and one thing she told me before I got started with my daughter was meet her where she is in this whole thing, this whole decision making, the whole research aspect of selecting a college, and the eventual decision making. And I didn't quite get what that meant. You don't want to project your own personality type onto your son or daughter, if you have an older one who's already gone through this. And so taking a step back, I found her advice very valuable as I moved into the process, because I realized pretty early on, neither of my kids was interested in talking about what they were thinking around the college process when I was ready for them to talk about that with me, right? We're a dinner together family, and most nights it gets harder as they get older, for sure. And so at least we had that little window of time as a touch point when often mom and dad, imbue that time with, okay, this is our moment. This is when we can kind of cover the things we're thinking about. I learned, at least dealing with my own kids, that you can't shoehorn that conversation into a 30-minute mealtime if they're not ready for that. Maybe planting the seed that, think of this as homework. We're going to need to talk about this later in the week. You let me know when you're ready to talk about it. Or, best advice that same friend gave me was ask your kid fairly often how they're feeling about this whole process, what they're thinking about it. When you're aware that they've seen an article you've seen, ask them what they thought about it. When you're aware that Sarah and her team are beginning meetings about certain topics, ask them how it went. See what comes of that. And you never know. Sometimes you'll end up with what was a half-hour meal slot turning into a much longer one, where you actually learn some stuff about what your kid is thinking. The other thing others with more experience at gender differences with the way students kind of navigate these processes, I've had to recalibrate the way I give advice with kid number 2 versus kid number 1. And I'd suggest that however you discern what works for your family, you try it out earlier rather than later. And so what I've kind of learned with kid number 2, who happens to be a boy, is that, you know, gentle suggestions and gentle course corrections work better to get him moving down a path that at least we've agreed seems like the right one for him. And the other benefit to that is that the kid begins to own the process. It isn't yours. It isn't your role really to perform certain functions in this process. And I have some pretty basic examples. I hadn't realized, maybe your sons are further along in these ways than my kids were, but I hadn't realized the stress that both my kids felt when it was time to compose an email to a teacher or to a college admission officer. Because in my family's case, at least, you know, in friend groups, it's all about texting, it's all about informality, it's all about pop by and speak face to face if possible. And so emailing a college admission officer with a pretty valid question, or emailing the college counselor because I can't get by there for a couple of days, that format of communication took on just this, in my view, disproportionate level of stress and concern. This may not be an issue for y'all. I'm just sharing it as an example of something I realized. And so here's where the gentle course correction came in for us. Dude, you can't send this. It's not written the way it needs to be written. That is what I'm thinking. But instead I'm realizing, okay, I'm going to need to coach around this. I'm going to need to suggest, so when I read that, what I'm sort of getting from it is that maybe you didn't think through the question fully. Maybe you dashed it off quickly because the grammar is not so great. So, you know, take another crack at that. This worked in my house. I don't know what's going to strike you as the appropriate course of yours, but the gentle course correction versus the let me work on that for you, and then we'll send it along. This translates in the longer term to things like essays, right? Initiating the Common App account, which all of y'all can do right now. Underclassmen can begin a Common Application account. I'm not telling you to do it. In fact, you probably shouldn't, because that might generate stress when you get in there. And it'll be different in 2 years' time, so don't do it. But the point is that we have experience dealing with families where it became clear as we were reading an application that this wasn't solely the student's work. And sometimes it is just easier to expedite these things. But what you do in those scenarios is sort of rob your kid of the ownership of it, and then the sense of accomplishment that can come with it. So we had an essay, in our office we like to sort of share, even though you're not supposed to read this application, I just read it, but the essay was awesome, so we'll send the name around. You know, we have an inter-office communication system. Do you all know about Slack? Does anybody use Slack in their places of work? Yeah. Or within family units. It can be a good thing if you limit the number of channels you have on it. People that are on Slack will immediately understand this. Well, we have a channel that relates to reading applications. We don't use it during this portion of the year when we're not reading applications, but during application season, all kinds of things get posted there, like, oh, stuck on this issue or that, technologically speaking, or awesome essay, you should take a few minutes and read it. Well, one was the brown side essay is how it became known in the office. And it was written by a student who was kind of making fun of her dad in the essay. And then the thesis of the essay was that it doesn't matter where we're going as a family. If my dad sees one of those brown interstate signs that's calling attention to an historic site or a college, by extension, that's where she was heading with this, is that it didn't matter. It didn't matter how late we were for whatever we were doing. We were getting off the interstate to go drive through and maybe spend 2 hours in an historic monument because of the brown side. That was a neat family anecdote. Well, that's how she learned about WNL. And so she wrote about that experience. So when it comes to visiting colleges, I'm actually a big fan of the casual college visit. represented by a drive-by, perhaps, maybe because you saw a sign. Maybe you have no interest as a family in that particular school, but it's a convenient way to expose your kid to a place, and maybe begin to illustrate the differences between big schools, small schools, urban and rural, liberal arts institutions, and comprehensive research universities. You know, you're going to get great advice about that from the team here, but we found that valuable in our house to sort of, because my kids have grown up on college campuses, to expose them to the other side of the coin. So think about brown signs when you're traveling. So and here's the thing that I don't know that I would have been able to vocalize this with child number one. But now I'm looking back and I can suggest that encouraging optimism throughout this experience will pay dividends. Not that my daughter isn't and wasn't an optimist related to the process, but my son is more that way. The needle with my daughter was sort of, depends on the day, glass half full, glass half empty. With him, it's most of the time it's a glass half full. And so what we were noticing after all of our initial college visits was he loved them all. He was, you know, as an admission guy, I was coming out of those kind of wanting to hear, well, what did you think about it? What were your reactions, pro and con? Are there any negatives here? And he had a hard time sort of ruling out any schools because he was able to see himself at a lot of different places, big and small, urban and relatively rural. You know, that's him. That may not translate to your situation, but if we take a step back from that sensibility, an overall sense of optimism helps get you to a place, get your son to a place, I think, where they can recognize that this notion of the one perfect fit school is a myth. It's a myth because there's not just one perfect fit school. I happen to subscribe to the belief that there could be multiple really good fits. One of my colleagues likes to use the Levi's jeans analogy that, you know, you want to pick a college that fits like a new pair of blue jeans, but think about how comfortable those jeans are after you've had them for a couple of years. They're your go-to. And that's what happens with the college choice too, because it isn't going to fit in every dimension, most likely. I've seen that with my own kid who picked the right school for her. From several. She was the kid, by the way, who in April, she was struggling with which of several really good and positive options for her of various selectivity types was the one for her. And so when she landed there, it was great. She has grown into it more, though, in this second year in ways we could never have predicted. And wouldn't have wanted to. That's part of the point, we think, of sending your kid off to grow and develop and learn new things. So the optimist preserves room in their brain and in their decision-making process for that potential is basically what I'm suggesting. And so when you do layer onto this whole process the notion of selectivity, and that though one or two places I've visited and I'm really, really interested in are pretty hard to get into and I might not make it, I might not be admitted. The optimist sees that there are other places that it may work out for me and are just as good in other ways as that first choice, or initial choice. I don't want to say first choice. So, optimism. List creation. I won't spend a ton of time on this because you have such a pro team here to help with it. Listen to Sarah and Anna for sure, and her colleagues who were introduced. I was going to point out that I am a fan of a couple of online guides and guidebooks in particular, and I don't mind telling you that the Fisk Guide to Colleges is probably my favorite. I remember looking at the Fisk Guide years and years ago, and it hasn't changed much. It's still a tome. It still weighs about 6 pounds. What you got to know about the Fisk Guide is that the colleges do participate in helping to create it. That's its strength, but that's also one of the rubs, I think, is that In contrast to some of the online sources that purport to use authentic student voices, you know, with ratings written by real life students, those tend to be like any message board. In my view, they tend to have polar opposites, you know, and it depends on the day as to which review you read. And it's hard, I think, to kind of mentally average those out and come away with a really kind of realistic view of the place. I like FISC. I actually like niche.com. I think that's what it's still called. I may be treading on waters that the counseling team here wouldn't have me on, but some of my college counseling friends and other places put me on to niche, and it does use reviews, but they, at least as I understand it, make some effort to calibrate those so that you're not getting that polar, you know, sense. I don't believe rankings of themselves are evil or bad or should be avoided at all costs. What I do believe, and would strongly suggest you think about on your own, is that rankings in a vacuum, devoid of other facts, figures, and your students' likes, dislikes, aspirations, are useless. So it's an old stat, but I remember learning at a conference once that over 600 schools, colleges and universities, appear on a top 10 list of some kind or another. Right? Which I think could help illustrate the point that it depends on your lens. It depends on what you're going for in looking at a ranking. They all have an editorial bias of some form or fashion. And so I'm a fan, actually, of encouraging students to kind of project their own desires onto those rankings. Their desires meaning the kinds of things that they think they may be looking for in a school, with your help, with the team's help here. Because it's that animates the rankings. You can't, whose judgment is it that a school is number 1 versus 25 or number 50 or not on the rankings, right? But if one or two of the columns contains data that doesn't matter to you with respect to placement rates from certain majors, or you know, the percentage of graduates that end up in certain metropolitan areas, and those kinds of things, then by all means, use those to help you get a handle on not just whether a school could be a good place for your kid, but maybe to help populate that list with some of the schools that you wouldn't have thought to include to begin with. So it isn't about who's at the top of the list, it's about the data within those. I think I'll stop for just a minute there. How long do we have again?
I'm kind of shooting for
9:20. Oh, good. Okay, so I divided what I was going to say into a couple of pieces. The first part was just that sort of meandering stuff about the way, you know, our family experienced this. But then I have some more thoughts around the application process and affording college, and happy to get into some of that. Most selective colleges, and by the way, let's take a step back and define that term, selective. That isn't a value judgment. It doesn't mean a college is good or better than a school that is somehow a little bit less selective. All selective means is there are a few more applicants for each year's class than there's room to admit. That's all it means. It's not a qualitative statement. But one of the terms that you may hear as you move through this process related to the college selection but by the colleges is the holistic mode of the applicant review. Not every selected school adheres to the holistic model, I should say that. Some are more formulaic in that they have massive applicant pools and have to do number crunching to help arrive at offers of admission. But this notion of holistic review is going to pop up more often than it's not, I suspect, for y'all. And what it means is there are a bunch of factors that a school is going to consider in the process. And I think of it as sides of a coin, the quantitative and the qualitative. And the quantitative is a lot, well, I almost said a lot easier, let's just say typically more easily accessible to those of us outside of a secondary school community. In other words, The team here will put together information about Gilman and each year's graduating class that will help me as an application reader and our staff to understand the rigors of being a student here. I'll never forget a conversation I had with Sarah's predecessor, one of her predecessors here, about the Dante class at Gilman. I wonder if it's still on offer. Yeah. Because I was an English major. I took Dante as a college junior, and the professor intimidated me every single day of the class in the best possible way. So I'm reading a transcript from Gilman, and I see Dante, just Dante, and I'm like, for real. I spent 3 months on just that, on just the divine, or just the divine content. So I picked up the phone and I'm like, tell me a little more about this class, and I hung up, 20 minutes later, thinking and realizing, yeah, these boys are, I wouldn't put them in the classroom quite yet with the professor who intimidated me, but they would be well equipped for that challenge. We gain this kind of intel from the stuff that the school is going to submit to us in the form of letters of recommendation, the school profile, and those kinds of conversations, which I have to point out, don't always happen between a college admission officer and a college counselor. We don't make the time for those conversations as often as I would like. But we do it when we know we're dealing with a trusted partner in the form, in this case, of Gilman and the staff here.
Can you wrap up in a couple minutes?
Sure. Yep. And so this notion of the holistic review captures the rigor of Gilman. I guess where I'm going with that is to let you know that your boys are going to be fine in terms of the college's appreciation for what they're accomplishing here. But the other side of it comes into play with all the other things that they'll submit on their own behalf. Essays, writing samples, resumes, and things along those lines. And know that, that we care about that stuff too. Since we're running short of time, I think the only other highlights that I would want to touch on, affirm the extracurricular commitments and activities that your boys are interested in. Don't game it, don't strategize it. Recognize that it's okay to change your mind, get into an activity and realize this is not for me. Colleges have, room in their process for the student who tried a few things out in the first couple of years before settling into a rhythm with the things that they value. And so as a parent, I would ask you, encourage you to affirm that ability that they have here to try things on for size. Sustained commitment, though, once they've settled into a rhythm, is also a virtue. And so just know that both sides of that are valued. Everything that was said about standardized test prep, I was going to echo. The fact that Gilman arranges that for your students is phenomenal for y'all. I was going to, not knowing what the playing field was there, here I was going to recommend try the free test prep first. Downloadable tests for both the SAT and ACT. You can take the exam. Mom and dad can score it. There's your baseline. So that is available. Anyway, y'all are going to be in great shape on the standardized testing. Finances. What I was going to just sort of assert on that point is that another relatively old statistic I came across in prep for another talk was that 80% of high school juniors, this is probably an 8 or 10-year-old stat, but I have a hard time thinking it will change much. 80% of high school juniors think they're going to win a competitive merit-based scholarship to go to college, and most will not. That's the reality. Financial aid is available at all kinds of schools, selective, non-selective, but the underlying premise from the college standpoint is that the family has the first obligation to fund the student's education. As a family, if you go into the process expecting that college will be free or mostly free, you will likely be disappointed if merit-based or talent-based or athletic or scholarships given for high grades is what y'all are aiming for. Need-based aid, on the other hand, is very much on the minds of people like me, because we have increasing concern about the people that are doing everything right, the middle class, increasingly the upper middle class families who've been paying down their homes, they don't have fancy cars, they're saving for college, but as the cost of college continues to rise, those very families are the ones that our aid programs are meant to help the most, and even then, we're expecting that they will shoulder the burden of affording college. And so recognizing that to the degree you've been saving and to the degree you've been investing in your home and other long-standing investments, some colleges are going to put those assets on the table as you go through this process. We could do a whole day about financial aid, so I don't want to terrify anybody about that. Net price calculators. All schools these days have a financial aid calculator online, and I highly encourage them. WNL has two. One is a quick calculator that asks about 6 questions. You'll be done with it in 3 minutes. If you don't like the answer on that one, do the longer price calculator. It takes about 20 minutes, and it will give you an even more dialed-in sort of estimate. All right, so
Thank you so much.
okay.